We should be live. I'm just going to wait until I can confirm it, and then we'll start the recording. Perfect. Let me see. I think it's working. It's still loading. Just going to assume it's working. And I'll record it just in case. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. If you'd like to support this show, please go over to mattbelair.com and consider becoming a member by donation. But the best thing you can do if you want to support is to do 3 kind acts wherever you are in the world today. Today's guest is the author of the acclaimed memoir, BrainStorm, From Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum. She is a business consultant, speaker, and author who has led organizational transformations at renowned companies around the world. She is also the leader of Seed Systems, an international consulting collaborative that she founded in 1994 to create a regenerative, inclusive, and kinder world. Welcome to the show, Sara Schley.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to dive into this conversation. You have a very diverse background, so I shortened the bio a lot. You've written a new book that looks very exciting, but you've also written a few other books. So you've been doing a lot of great work for a long time. And I'd love for you to just catch the audience up, like tell them a little bit about yourself and how you got into the work you're doing and what led you to writing your newest book.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's like, where do you start time? At the beginning of time. But I'll just say for, about 30 years of my career, I've been as you mentioned, a consultant working in environmental and social sustainability in large corporations like Nike and Ford and Eileen Fisher and others. So that was my, livelihood and my professional persona. And I've written a book on sustainability called The Necessary Revolution with some other folks. And at the same time, throughout that whole period, without, my colleagues or pretty much anyone knowing, I've been wrestling with a bipolar brain on the bipolar spectrum since I was 21. So that's been, a parallel process that has, I said I kept in the closet, and I really kept that hidden for almost 4 decades, really only the people closest to me knew until recently. And I decided to come out and tell my story for 3 reasons. 1, end the stigma. 2, save lives. And 3, maximize healing. And I think I was particularly motivated now because of the pandemic and this mental health tsunami that's pandemic induced, and so many people need help. So it was time.
Wow. Well, that's a very short and concise summary. With your book, how many people did it say? I saw the number. It said there's millions of people that are on the bipolar spectrum. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I've just done a bunch of research because I gave a TED talk about 10 days ago. And according to, I turned to Dr. Holly Schwartz, who's University of Pittsburgh professor at the medical school and one of the world-renowned authorities on the bipolar spectrum. And according to her, National Alliance on Mental Illness and others, there's about 7 million people with bipolar presently in the States, and at least half of those on the bipolar spectrum, which we'll get into in a minute, I'm sure. And I believe those numbers are significantly underreported because of A, the stigma, and B, misdiagnosis.
Right. Wow.
Probably a lot more people.
That's quite a few. And if we're not even counting all the other mental health issues that are going on, there are so many different ways that people need support in the mental health field. And this is one of the, I would say stigmatized ones, but also frightening. Like it can go into the state where people even get into a manic state, right? Where it's kind of like really off. And then what I've seen is people don't even really know how to treat it. There's all these different methods. So what have you found to be true or helpful in the path to recovery? Like if someone is struggling with that, is that they're a victim to this kind of flow of going from high to low, or can they kind of even it out?
Yeah, well, there's the reason I wrote the book is because there are lots of opportunities for help. And I, on purpose, the subtitle, it's called BrainStorm from Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum. And I was very intentional about using that word bipolar spectrum, because if I asked you, have you ever heard of a bipolar spectrum before? Tell the truth.
No.
Nope. 99 out of 100 people I ask have not heard of it. And yet it exists, right? And so because people don't understand the spectrum, people are misdiagnosed and they're given the wrong medications, which can make them even worse. So what is it? What you were describing, Matt, is, extreme highs, extreme lows, people who show up with extreme mood swings, and on the manic side, maybe wild all-night sprees or other kinds of troublesome behaviors, right? But that's describing what is known commonly as bipolar 1, Roman numeral 1, manic depression. And when people think of bipolar, they just think of that, somebody who's way high, way low. But it turns out there's a whole spectrum of bipolar, just like there's spectrums of so many other things we're learning, autism, sexuality, et cetera. And there are lots of other gradations of bipolar. So in my case, I'm bipolar 2. Why does that matter? Well, bipolar 2 people and other along the spectrum, in my case, we do not show up as manic. We don't exhibit extreme mood swings. When we appear in a doctor's office, it's with great depression, right? So because there's not the big mania, we consistently get misdiagnosed as, oh, she's just depressed and let's give her antidepressants, but those drugs can make you actually worse. I'll take a breath.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could go on and give you the whole TED Talk. So I'm gonna take a breath and let you ask some questions.
No. Yeah, please continue. Well, that's basically what the solution is 9 times out of 10, right? Is to diagnose with some sort of pharmaceutical. Same with allopathic medicine a lot of the time, where they're not looking a lot at nutrition. I've had a lot of doctors on and they say they got 16 hours of education on nutrition. So if you're obese or you have heart issues, you can cut the body up and do all these different things, but you got to get to the root of the problem. And so I'd love for you to talk about some of the solutions that you came to, where you talk about in your book, generating skills and practices just to help, center yourself and overcome mental health challenges. So I'd love for you to speak on that or anything else that you want to dive into.
Sure. Well, it's really important to get the proper diagnosis. And so there is, it took me 5 psychiatrists in 25 years. And because the bipolar spectrum is so little known and misunderstood, but the 5th psychiatrist who finally got it right, he dedicated himself to understanding the complexity of bipolar. Okay. So one thing is, it's, some of the psychiatrists are experts on the bipolar spectrum I've talked to now will show you a diamond, 4 points, 4-pronged approach, right? If you have a bipolar brain like me, you need medication. So that's part 1, right? And it took me 25 years to accept that. So I want to emphasize to people, right diagnosis, right medication is going to be really important. But in my opinion, necessary but not sufficient. In addition, there's 3 other things in the diamond that experts recommend. One is therapy, right? Getting, working the emotional side of it. Another is a support network, that you have a community that is backing you up, right? And the 4th, which I think you will appreciate because you're a Zen athlete, are what I call practices for a healthy brain. And those, we can double click on those. I use the acronym PECS, which I like for memory, and it stands for physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual. So I have a wide array of practices that I employ with religious discipline because of what's at risk for my brain if I don't do that. So I think those are essential, but that alone wasn't enough to keep me, stable too. I also need help with on the medical side.
Right. Wow.
On the medication side.
Yeah. You go into the book, you talk about practices for a healthy brain. Did you find some of the techniques were more helpful, or did you find any research on that? Because a lot of people don't know where to start, right? They'll say, oh, okay, I could do yoga. I could do meditation. I don't know how to meditate. I could do breath work. I could do this and that. What the heck do I do? So what practices have you found that were the most beneficial to just make you feel better?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not super, schooled on the research on that. I know that, aerobic exercise I'm pretty sure there's research out there to confirm that that's important, move the body, endorphins, et cetera. What I say is that I shoot for balance, doing something in each of those 4. being physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual. So in the physical, it's move your body, pick the exercise you like. I do all of them, hike, bike, swim, ski, skate, pick your season. I'm in the Northeast where we have seasons. But getting aerobic is really important, and doing that, on a daily basis if you can. I also do yoga. I think for my brain, it's calming, it's helpful, it's steadying. I do that first thing in the morning almost every day, and it sets my, I call it like the physical and spiritual attunement. It sets my day up right. On the emotional side, that's key too, particularly around now. We're in Zoom all the time. Human beings, we're not designed to be isolated. We're social creatures. So having a community, I say, combine physical and emotional, go for a walk with a buddy, do something with someone else. So there's that emotional connection. I'm involved in a chorus and a writer's group, whatever, so that I have more and more community. I have a lot of community around me in addition to family. And then on the creative end, pick what you love. It could be dancing, writing, cooking, gardening, something that's going to get you out of your left brain into that more creative, restorative space. And then for spiritual, I'm a big fan of unplugging from, disconnecting from technology to reconnect with nature. Because again, we weren't designed to spend 8 hours staring at these screens. And the research does show that it's restorative for the brain to get out into nature and have, then walk, bike, hike, play, listen to music, do whatever you do to connect with something larger than yourself. So those are things I do.
I love that. Well, it's very simple, right? It's not that complicated. It's just, I think that people don't set up their lives around those things where they get in this massive imbalance. And once the imbalance goes too far, then they want to take action, right? So maybe their health is out of order and, they haven't exercised and their diet's bad and they got a little bit obese, and then the heart issue comes and then they take that action. And it's very well rounded what you're speaking about. And I've heard stories from documentaries and even people on the podcast where they get a diagnosis of something like cancer. And so what they do is like, oh my goodness, the doctor said I'm going to die. So I'm going to just take out all the stress. I'm going to stop everything I was doing. Then they go into this like stress-free lifestyle where they just try to increase the quality of their life. And all of a sudden it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years later when they were supposed to only have this short duration of time. And then you look at some of the research that we now know about stress and about all these, things that we do in our daily life. Well, you remove all those and the body can go back into homeostasis. It doesn't mean it's going to work every time, but you're having a more balanced lifestyle that's going to be better for you in every way, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And we don't schedule it. We don't make it important, right? Everything else seems to be the most important thing. And one of the things that they sent me over, which I was curious about, because I think it's a challenge for so many people. You talk about how to silence the noise in your head and have a newfound clarity. I feel like most people have a maniac in their mind. In a lot of the coaching that I do, whether it's sports or whether it's something else, it's about understanding that inner dialogue and what it's saying. And I always find it curious, why isn't our inner dialogue the most supportive, amazing, helpful, kind, compassionate inner voice? It's like this son of a gun in there, always, mostly and very often for most people just not being supportive. So I'd love your tools on that, because I feel like, especially if you're on the spectrum, it might be a little bit more challenging because they're going to lead you down a depressive alley potentially. And when you're in a deep depression, people feel like they can't get out, or you're in deep anxiety and every day you're getting up and you're in anxiety, worried about the future. And both of those states of being are very stressful.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think there is research that says that human beings evolved around negativity because we had to make sure that the saber-toothed tiger didn't get us, right? So we got wired for fear, and that's not so helpful, right? The practice, in addition to all of the, like I say, religious discipline, I call it, because I have radical respect for my bipolar brain, so I have to take really good care of it. But there's another, you could say an emotional tool, maybe psychological tool that I've been practicing for 30 some years. Is called shadow work. And you can look up shadowwork.com. It's developed by a guy called Cliff Barry. I've been a practitioner for 30 years also. As practitioners, we have to both receive shadow work and facilitate it. So the work that I've been on the receiving end there, it does a lot of work on those inner voices and healing that. And we do it through role play and through all kinds of stuff. That would be a whole other podcast, Matt. But I think there are practices for whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or Byron Katie's another one, her work called The Work, shadow work, that help us with the voices inside our brain and flip them. And I have one of my teachers that's coming to my mind right now, Donna Markova. She used to talk about those voices as, is it a river story or a rut story? A river story keeps you moving. A rut story keeps you in a rut, right? And that's just a story your mind is making up. So, if the story is, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, that's going to pretty much lead to I'm going to fail. Versus if I recognize that's a rut story and then I flip it, it's as simple as saying, I'm going to succeed. But so, yeah, there's lots of different techniques for self-talk.
Well, I love that example, the river versus rut story. I've never heard that before. And I feel like the shadow work, whether people give it different terms, but shadow work and your inner critic and the inner dialogue, and in neurolinguistic programming, they also call it the map of the world, or the story you tell yourself, right, about anything. This was so prevalent in athletes. And so I didn't, some athletes naturally have a very high and strong mental game. They're just doing everything naturally, but a lot of people don't. But that necessity in sport to succeed at the highest level, especially when your body's on the line. So from a martial arts perspective or extreme sports perspective, that's where I really got into the inner dialogue and what we say to ourselves before we're about to attempt something, where if we fail, we could be seriously harmed. And so there's a necessity at that level. And that's why I feel like most people don't apply this stuff, even in sport and in life, because in basketball, if you say, oh, I might miss this shot, or, I missed a shot, I'm a loser, I just got to take this other shot. Nothing bad physically is going to happen. It's going to be emotional and guilt and going to be terrible. In snowboarding and skateboarding and some of these other sports, you don't have that opportunity. It's not like, oh, I can think this, you might be going to the hospital with a broken back or two broken legs. So you have to learn how to put yourself in that state. But if you can, it's a whole different way to look at life. And that's why I wrote Zen Athlete years ago, because I wanted to trick the kids into learning this, because the reason why everyday people aren't applying it is because there's not that necessity. It's like they're kind of stuck in this. They don't have this like competitive nature where they can bring it out and really force it. And you would know this from, all the other things that you do, that you can bring this out into everything. And I just love maybe if you have like a top technique or perspective around that idea, because I feel like it's so important to heal the inner world, whether it's shadow work or one of the techniques you shared, to get somebody who has maybe never tried to say, okay, here are some beginning steps to start understanding your internal dialogue and change it to something that's more supportive, that's going to work for you rather than against you.
Yeah. So it's absolutely essential, right? And I have to say, I just want to give the caveat that if I'm in an active bipolar depressive state, it's very hard to do any of this, because it's like the inner critic has taken over and I don't understand the chemistry of that. So everything I'm doing now is preventive. And, once you're in it, these things will still help, but it's going to be tough. So what's coming to mind for me right now, Matt, is something called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT. It's like a lot of other probably modalities that you mentioned, that you can find outside of University of Massachusetts Medical School, a guy named John Kabat-Zinn. And it's a very simple approach to, kind of mindfulness meditation. But the part that I have a hard time meditating because I like to move too much. I'm better with yoga. I call it mindfulness meditation in motion. So for me, it's harder to sit. But what I learned from these guys that I find very, very helpful is a simple technique to disaggregate yourself from what your brain is telling you, right? So if I am noticing that I'm feeling anxious or scared, if I can get to a place where I say fear is arising, or judgment is arising, or comparing mind is arising, or jealousy is arising, whatever it is, once I get to is arising, then I've disaggregated. I'm not it, right? And then I can flip to whatever I want to say instead. So if I have an affirmation, so let's say fear is arising, I notice it in my body that I'm, getting tense, whatever that looks like, dry throat, tight shoulders. And this is a whole other conversation we could have, which are the skills to notice those things. But fear is arising. Okay. And then I want to say, I am grateful, or I am capable, or I am strong, or if I see jealousy is arising, that's not a helpful emotion, right? So, I love so-and-so, or whatever it is, it's the turnaround on the phrase. But the blank is arising. Those 3 words I find very helpful to kind of raise my awareness to disaggregate myself from whatever that negative talk is. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, it's a really wonderful technique, right? You're not identifying as the thing, you're observing it, right? It's the feeling is coming up and you're observing it. So it allows you the power of choice and will to change it, right? So I think it's a very simple and powerful technique. And it's actually something very similar I do with my coaching clients. I'll get them to wear like a watch or a bracelet or something to train them to notice where they go into the state. So maybe they slip into anxiety or depression quite a bit. So say, all right, well, when you notice that depression, right, then stop and take deep breaths, but 3 deep breaths, and we'll figure out some sort of little pattern, like a pattern interrupt. Because what happens is, it's like, in my view, is a mental map of the world. When you're in depression or anxiety, any of these triggers can just send you there, right? There's so many pathways for you to go to that spot. So you want to kind of disrupt those patterns, those neural pathways in your brain. So when you can take 3 deep breaths and then add an affirmation or add a prayer, something unique, I usually just say 3 deep breaths and something that works for them to reset. And then what do you want? If you don't want to be anxious, what do you want? I want to feel empowered, right? So what's the thing you're going through? So with it, whether it's anxiety, you take the bracelet off and you put it on the other hand. Now what you're doing is you're training yourself to notice your states of being. And then in that point, you have a choice of how you're going to, combat that experience, right? So in martial arts, if I'm going into combat, I'm afraid because they want to kick and punch me in the face, right? But I train, even though I'm aware of that situation, I'm training myself to be in the moment, right, through those circumstances so that I can perform at my highest level. But we can bring this into everyday life. And what happens, I feel like I'm trying to phrase this properly. Like, I'll phrase it. The most unfortunate thing is that so many people feel like they're stuck in that frame, that it's impossible to change, right? If you're depressed, then you're going to be depressed, or whatever your mind does. And then you feel that's just what you get, right? You can actually be more deliberate and apply your will and consciousness to your states of being throughout the day and shift them. Like one of your examples, if you're feeling like crap, go for a walk in the forest. Now you have the environment. Now no more phones, because we know they're addictive now, like casinos. Just going through that. You take your phone away and you have a friend, right?
Yes.
It's so simple.
You hit physical, emotional, and spiritual in one shot. Go for a walk with a buddy in the woods without the phone.
100%, right? And then see if you feel better, but that's you taking action, right? So now you're back in the driver's seat, because if you go from the victim mentality, it's very hard to overcome the circumstance. But if you're in a more empowered mentality, it's going to be a lot easier for you to find solutions to whatever you're going for, because life is challenging and it is emotional and it is heartbreaking and it is sad and it is depressive and it is, it's an anxious ride. There's so much stuff to be anxious about. So we got to learn to train ourselves to be more adaptable, to be more connected. And I feel like that spiritual element is a big part too, to know that you're connected to something more, and your work in your past books and everything you've done is a part of that as well. And I'd love for you to speak about some of your past work and books, and how do we gain like a bigger perspective, because if it's all about me and my little world, sometimes we can feel defeated, right? But if we have a little bit of a bigger purpose, a bigger connection, I feel like we're more inspired to get through and persevere.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I go there, I just want to go back and highlight 2 things you said. I want, because I want does take you out of victim mode. And it flips the switch. So if I'm feeling, jealousy is arising or envy is or fear, once I notice that, to go to what I want, I really support what you just said. That's something we do in shadow work also. And there's a whole pathway we could go down around learning your body sensations that are teaching you that you're scared, right? So I'm at the point now where I know I'm physically wired to understand or notice, like I was saying before, oh, my breath is short, dry, tension in my shoulders. That's fear. It's different for different people. But so kind of being tuned into body sensations are really important. I'm sure you do that in your show, Matt. But in terms of the larger spiritual, connecting to something bigger than ourselves, one of the earlier books I wrote is called Secrets of the Seventh Day. And it's about how everyone can find renewal through the wisdom and practices of the Sabbath. So I happen to be a Jewish practitioner, and I unplug, not fully anymore, because once I had the kids, then you kind of got to know where they are, but mostly unplugged for 25 hours from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. So a friend of mine, and what happens during that time is it's tremendously healing and regenerative, because I do unplug from work. I unplug from shopping. I unplug from trying to fix things. I unplug from trying to improve my relationship with my husband. I unplug from all that stuff, with the intent of celebrating the perfection of this moment. So it flips your mindset, and the whole day is about gratitude. So I wrote the book because one of my friends who witnessed what I was doing and loved that. And she's like, I've got 3 kids and the husband, he works downtown Boston, a financial district. We're going 90 million miles all the time. We never see each other. When I grew up, we had Sunday at church. We always had a time that was quiet. I want to do what you do, Sarah. I said, but Linda, you're Catholic. She goes, I don't care. I want you to teach me how you do it. So I wrote a book basically that is ecumenical for anybody to be able to appreciate some of these rituals. You don't have to do them all, but you could pick what works for you. So like, for example, we pass wine or grape juice around the table and say, what are you grateful for? And we did that with the kids all the way from age 1, right? Which is sort of imbuing a gratitude consciousness, which is the opposite of scarcity mind, the opposite of what's wrong, the opposite of what I'm not getting right. And, there's all kinds of research about the power of gratitude. So, so that's part of, without going into that whole book, but we can do more if you want. There's a way that there's like this magic of unplugging and just being and enjoying and celebrating being in gratitude for a day, that I mentioned all those things I don't do. Like my husband drive me crazy on Friday afternoon. By Saturday night, he's the greatest guy that ever lived. In other words, the problem fixes itself by not focusing on it when we focus on gratitude instead.
Well, I love that idea and the practice. And I also love what you said, where you shared celebrating the perfection of the moment. Is that how you phrased it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And again, it shifts your whole entire worldview, and it's so powerful. And I had Michael Balkin on a few shows ago, and he created this amazing app called Heroic that's got all these mindfulness tips. And he just shared that he has that practice too, where everything gets shut off, no phone calls, anything, nothing for work. And he's a young man too. And I remember David Lombear a couple of years ago, he says, my new suggestion is just to shut off your phone from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. or 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. every day, and just shut it off. But it was, the idea is like, we're getting so more plugged in.
Yeah.
It's becoming more artificial. Even when you look online, when I grew up, Facebook was just coming in, but now we have all this social. So you have your own, let's say, egoic masks that you go through the world and you try to adapt and understand and navigate this world. But now you have this artificial world, this avatar, where it's got the best filters, the things you've done, and now people can judge you there. So a lot of people have all these other elements that they're tied into and engaged with and vying for their energy, rather than just simply existing and getting back to the simple ways. And the older I get, the more I value that, like a simple life with, I don't know.
Yeah.
Good food, a good community, we can do things in person, and it's not too extravagant. It's just very high quality, very simple, and very slow. It's a very beautiful way of living. And it feels like this media machine, including all the social medias and everything out there, it's just very fast paced and very artificial. And we're living more in there rather than just going for that simple walk down the beach, having that conversation with a friend, and maybe you talk about this in your book as well, but maybe somebody who's struggling, right? They're going through a rough time. How do we reach out to that person rather than just, we're aware that they're there? Maybe you can just reach out and invite them for a coffee, stop by, bring them some flowers just to let them know that they're loved. That can be game changing for people, especially in times when they're really, really down.
You want to talk about that for a minute, Matt?
Sure.
Because I get the TED Talk right on the top of my head right now. So, so it turns out right now, pandemic-induced mental health tsunami, you said probably a lot more than 7 million people are suffering. 1 in 5 Americans are experiencing a mental health challenge, 1 in 5. So that's 66 million people, right? So even if you don't have a brain challenge, you definitely know someone who is going through something right now that's tough. So after as I started to do talks around the book and stuff, people on Zoom or in person, have said to me, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was that bad. If they knew me, I wish I'd known how to help. And then, or if they didn't know me, they'd be like, how do I help my cousin or my brother, my sister, my mother that I don't know what to do. And people kind of get frozen like deer in the headlights with mental health. So I came up with what I call your EMT toolkit. It stands for Emergency Mental Health Team Toolkit. And it's only 4 things, right? Because you can't remember more than 4. One of the things you just said reminded me, you said reach in. So I say, number 1 is reach in. Don't expect them to reach out. They won't. Okay. You knock on the door, you make the phone calls. Because when I've been really sick, I'm not going to call you. First of all, I think why would you want to spend any time with me? Second, I'm too, in too much despair. Third, I think I'm worthless. All these, really dysfunctional self-talk that happens. That's really the depression talking. So I'm not going to do it. Or I forget your phone number, or I don't think, whatever it is. So you have to reach into me. I won't reach out. The second thing is just simply accompany this person. Don't try to fix it. You can't. All right. But what you can do is just listen with love and non-judgment. And these people are living in an island of despair. They feel isolated and alone. You're showing up in itself is hugely healing, right? You don't have to fix it, just show up. But then I say the third thing, well, then there's those of you who really want to do something, just showing up is not enough. So here's what you can do. You can't fix it, but you can make the appointments. You can take them to the doctors. You can pick up the kids. You can fill the freezer. You can, do the laundry. These kinds of simple tasks for someone like me, when my brain's broken, those are Herculean tasks. So you can do those, and that's going to be huge. And then the fourth thing, the last thing is, don't try to do this alone. You got to create a posse. You're going to need a support team, right? And because otherwise you're going to burn out. Like, my kids, they're sophomores in college right now. So they went into college during the pandemic, right? And kids are dropping like flies. 1 out of 2 young people, according to the Surgeon General, is experiencing anxiety or depression. So, my daughter's super compassionate. She's like tuned into this one guy who's suicidal. And honey, you cannot do this alone. You got to create a posse. So, and thank God he's good now. But that's the thing. We need to have a support team, and sooner or later, God knows you're going to need it. And it's a community of compassion and action that gets created. That's beautiful for everybody. So.
That's amazing. I love that. Well, it's nice and simple, and it's practical. And I feel like those are really key pointers. Just the listening one, that's it. People, you feel helpless when you're in it, but people also feel helpless to help. So
Right.
How do I fix this? What do I do? And, I have, experiences of friends and family that have gone through similar things, and they won't reach out,
You're not going to reach out.
So,
No.
yeah, you got to
You're
go.
too ashamed. You're too
Yeah.
ashamed to reach out. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And go ahead.
I was going to say just what I said before. You got those of us who are in good shape at that moment have to reach in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's those very, very simple things. Just say even the fact they know you're there, if that's all you're doing, that's enough, right? You're not there to fix it. And then when you can have that opportunity to meet them in person, just listen, right? Just be a very good listener, because you'll notice if you can become a very good and active listener, you'll realize that very few people are able to do that. Most people are listening, waiting to speak. One of the simplest drills you can do, and you'll watch, especially if you're talking to women in a relationship. That's the first time I tried this. Somebody taught me this as a friend of mine, and he just has the amazing relationship with his wife. Like they're in their 50s and they look like high school, kids. I was like, how are you guys so in love? I was just like, this is unbelievable. And so he's talking, he's like, yeah, we love each other a lot. But he goes, one of the things I do is, I was like, because he was talking about something. And I go, well, sometimes I talk to, my wife, and she's just talking about nothing. He goes, it's the field report. I was like, what? He goes, well, I don't know if this is true, but what he said is back in the day, hunting and gathering, women would go to the fields and they come back and they'd report everything they saw to us. And I was like, okay, it's like a primal thing. So what you got to do is you got to listen, don't say anything, and then repeat back what you heard and say, is there anything else? That's it. So I did that. And then it was fun, this funny pause with her on the phone because I had been traveling and I just did this big speaking engagement and it was a big deal where I was. She told me about her day. And then there's this pause that was kind of awkward. And then she told me a lot more and I'd been using it, but I use it with everyone now, coaching clients, friends, everything like that. Because when you say, is there anything else? Did I hear you correctly? You're actually being heard, right? So you think that you're hearing them and understanding what they're saying, but when you do this, you're really reaching into that understanding. And that to me is a really, really beautiful gift that you can give people. That's simple when you're doing it from an honest way. You want them to be full, like you're there to listen fully, active listening. And the other example that I saw of this was my friend Clifford Mahooty, who's very sadly passed. He was a Zuni elder.
Oh,
And I remember we would go around and we do these, I would watch him speak and there'd be groups of people. And sometimes we'd go around and everybody would speak. He would, he's very short and he would have his arms crunched up like this and he'd have his eyes closed. And I'm like, Clifford's not a rude guy. Like, why is he having his eyes closed? Right. Yeah. And he goes, I talked to him after, he's literally listening with all of his might. It's like, I have never seen somebody listen with all of their might. Like that was just so simple, but a very, very beautiful gift. So I just want to share the power of those two examples and how meaningful it can be, especially when you're in there, because you're not trying to fix it. They're helping to feel understood when they're in this place, and that will give them the leeway to process a little bit of what they're going through and maybe give them that next tiny little action step to get a little bit better on the path to, where they want to be, to feeling better.
absolutely. There's a quote from this woman, Terry Chaney, an author of something called Manic, a memoir. And she says, the disease feeds on silence. Silence feeds on shame, and I will not be silent anymore. So the thing is that it's like, if you show up as that person who can be present to listen, then I'm not silent anymore, right? And my shame goes down some. And if my shame goes down some, then maybe the stigma goes down some, and then maybe I'm going to be willing to reach out to get more help. So I think it's absolutely essential. It's like piercing a bubble of isolation and shame and silence. And I say that, the stigma actually, it can be lethal because people feeling the shame and the stigma won't reach out for the life-saving help they need.
Yeah. And, then that kind of gets into a little bit of a darker scenario where you have people, doing suicide and things like that, which is terrible. And if you look statistically over the last few years, that's way up. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the stigma, the idea, because there's the bipolar in your understanding and field, but then there's mental health in general, right? I think you could look at old timey movies, but I'm just imagining, the comedy where they go, I'm not going to a therapist. There's nothing wrong with me, right? You got that kind of generational thinking. Now, maybe it's like, okay, you could go to a therapist, but I still feel like there is a lot of just stigma around mental health and how people will perceive you. So how do we break, if you're the individual in it, what's their path to seeking help? If you could give them like some 2 cents, because that's the most important. Just, what, you're going to label me, whatever you're going to label me, I need the help. Right. And that really cripples them, unfortunately. But then how could we do that as either a friend or a society to begin to break that down? So it's like, what, if you need the help, that's okay. I'm not going to judge you or shame you or think less of you because of this, that's a big thing. It's a big deal.
Massive stigma in our country against mental illness. It took me 40 years to be willing to tell the truth. I wish I'd spoken out a lot sooner. But what I would say to people is like similar to what my mentor told me. What she said, she goes, Sarah, you've done nothing wrong. You don't deserve to suffer. This is genetic. This is physical. Reach out and get the help. It's like this part about that you are innocent. You've done nothing wrong. This is genetic. This is physical. Reach out and get the help. At that point, I had, I was holding a life by a thread. I had 2 little kids who needed me, so that I had to. Right. But I wish I'd listened a lot sooner. I think it's getting better. Sadly, because this is mental health tsunami, so many people know somebody with the opioid addiction crisis and the mental health tsunami, I think more and more people are aware and be willing to ask for help. And that's a good thing, because we need to encourage people. Our job, if we're not sick, is to show up with non-judgment. So we reduce the stigma. But I wrote this book. Part of the reason I'm coming out is because I'm trying to end the stigma look at me, nice middle-aged lady, good career, kids, husband. This is the face of bipolar, right? And you might have had a different stereotype about that. Oh, that's the person in the street. No, this is the face of bipolar. So get out there and get the help. I have to say that in the opening of the book, I have a scene where I'm with my teenagers at the time. They're 20 now. And I was in a dilemma about whether or not to publish the book, because on the one hand, there's a stigma and I'm afraid to come out. Maybe I'll lose clients. Maybe I'll lose my reputation. Maybe people will judge me, right? On the other hand, I could save lives, right? And I asked my kids, I put that dilemma to them and I said, what do you think? And they both at the same time, 17, said, Mom, you have to do this. Is the most important thing you could do. And then they went on to say, that's your generation that worries about it. We don't care. You know, we don't have the stigma anymore. We know kids that are cutting themselves. We know kids are on meds. Don't worry, Mom. You know, the stigma's ending. Well, I hope they're right. You know, I do believe it's getting better, sadly, because we're in this tsunami. But yeah, get the help that you need. Reach out. And if it's too hard for you to actually call a doctor, call your friend, husband, wife, partner, grown child, and have them get the doctor. Just say, you know, I'm like, my sister Martha, I can't do it. I need you to find me a doctor. And she did. So just find someone who can be, I call it your brain buddy, who you love, who you trust, who you know has your back, and get them to get you the help that you need.
That's very, as you say, brilliant, but just practical. You know, I just know people, and I've been pretty down myself. I think in my younger 20s, I struggle with depression. I feel like there are times now where I just look at the world and think, holy smokes. But definitely in my 20s, it was a little bit rough. And I know those states of being, and I know friends who've been stuck in those states, and just getting help and all these simple practical tools are so important and so critical, especially, you know, when people are right at the bottom, just to know that there is a glimpse of hope, because that's really where, you know, the really final things come in, where people think of something, you know, like suicide or something like that. They see no way out. They can't
Right.
see it getting any better.
Right.
And so just sharing your story and people talking about it a little bit more, having a little bit more understanding around these issues will be more empowering. And then we have the other side of the scale where we, you know, go from deep anxiety and depression, or even like a mild case, and you're able to just stabilize that and create an empowered way of being, you know, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You're going to be that rock for another person. You have to be, you know, the solution you want to see in the world, right? It's just like, I give the example for spirituality, where it's like, you know, our physical bodies you could see. So if everybody in the world were, you know, 400 pounds and you are just, you know, 150 and really fit, people would see that example. Just to know that it exists is a beautiful thing. So energetically, spiritually, emotionally, if we can be that example, you know, learn to just understand ourselves and how we operate in this world, build our character up, and then be that support for other people as they may need a hand going through this, because life can be incredibly challenging. And I love the quote that says something like, never judge a person you never know what they've been going through, or something like that.
Yeah,
Like,
right. If we knew the stories of our deepest enemies, our hearts could not help but be filled with compassion. Everybody's got a story.
That's even better than what I was thinking.
Yeah, everybody's got a story.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned earlier, Matt, in the conversation about homeostasis. And, you know, so homeostasis is balance, right? And in nature, everything seeks balance. Temperature, salinity, breath, you know, the deer and the wolves, everything in nature is about balance. But our culture is about exponential growth, and that's outlaw from nature, right? So seeking balance is countercultural. Now, I grew up in a family. I write about my dad. He was a first gen, you know, immigrant, and his mantra was work, 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 think later. So all us kids grew up with work, 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 think later, which also meant feel later, rest later, you know, take a break later. There's a part of that that's brilliant because you're going to be driven to succeed. There's a part of that that is a recipe for burnout and disaster. So with my bipolar brain, that ended up being a recipe for burnout and disaster, right? If I just go all the time. So over time, it took me a few decades. I hope for your listeners, it can be sooner. I realized that my goal is balance, not exponential growth. My goal is homeostasis. My friend calls it homeostatic wisdom, right? Linda Booth Sweeney. So if that becomes your goal, then it's a whole different metric, right? So like in my day, when I start my day, I look at, okay, every morning I say, where am I getting my exercise? Where am I getting my nutrition? Where am I getting my rest every day? So if I'm going to be like at a conference and I, need to be talking all day, I'm like, okay, where am I going to get the break and borrow key to somebody's room so I get my nap? Because I have to have my power nap between 4 and 5, or if I'm going to be out and about, I don't know, the kids were younger and there was a baseball game, okay, when am I going to get my 15 minutes to go to Whole Foods and get my picnic? So I'm going to eat that instead of hot dogs, So I'm in the beginning of my day, kind of setting the compass towards balance for the whole day. And that's now how I determine if it's been a good day versus it used to be, did I chain myself to my desk for 12 hours?
Yeah, that's a huge insight right there, because wherever you're aiming is where you're going to go, right? Whatever your goals are. If you're not aiming, I just say it's kind of creating life by default, right? Just life will happen and you'll kind of be pulled in these different directions and you'll do what you have to do to make money, to put food on the table. And that's about it. But most people have goals and they set these certain goals, so they're going to go in that direction. And I think you're right. People, it's like more money, more materialism, more stuff, more experiences, rather than the balance. And I also equate this to knowing what your values are, because part of your balance, and you look at what you like to do, you like to hike and bike and snowboard and get outside. That stuff is fulfilling to you. It's it's simple, and it puts you in balance, rather than, if you were career minded, maybe in your previous life, where you're like, how could I, get the next deal and get even more money and then a cottage in the Hamptons or whatever the case is, but
then be miserable. And then divorce and kids who hate you because you never talk to them.
Yeah, well, exactly, right. So
Heaven
then
forbid.
you're sacrificing the kids, you're sacrificing all these other things. So I think we need to be realistic in our goals. And in the younger people, I'd say, like, give yourself more time. I remember in the 20s, I thought I was going to get everything immediately. Now that I'm older, I'm like, I'll dedicate 10 years to my next goal. I'll just make sure it's worthy enough of my time and energy while I'm pursuing that goal, making sure that my close relationships are good and I have time with my daughter, because it's not worth just working all this time and not watching her grow up, not being a father, not being in her life, not having a high quality relationship, not taking care of my body, maybe for a short period of time, for like, okay, 3 months and I'm going to go ham, because I have to, and I'm very clear on what my goal is, and then to come back. But really just understanding your own self through your values. So I think seeking balance versus seeking exponential growth is just such a critical insight.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean you're not going to be successful. I mean, I still have a business for 30 years, but it's like, does it need to have revenues of $1 million, or can it have revenues of 200,000? And what's the difference? In one case, you could still have a profitable situation, but like you said, okay, time for the kids, time for the exercise, time for this, time for that. And I actually found, there's an analog. When I was in college, I played varsity sports. And the seasons that I played, I always got better grades. And you go, wait a minute, you're spending 20 hours in practice. How's that the case? Why? Because balance, right? Moving my body, more endorphins, more energy, more focus, more discipline when I wasn't at practice. So it's not like a zero-sum game. It's not like if you just do balance, that means you're going to just be, sniffing flowers, even though you will sniff flowers.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, this has been beautiful and I think practical and very helpful. Is there anything that I should have asked that you would like to discuss before we close this? Make sure you tell people where they can find your book and your work. But is there anything else that you feel like we might have missed that should be discussed on this topic?
The field report.
Yeah.
Let me think. No, thanks for asking. 4 things. I guess I just want to say that I want to reiterate that for someone like me on the bipolar spectrum or depression or other, like mental health diagnoses where there was a genetic or a biochemical brain thing, I don't want to be flippant about that and say, balance alone or exercise alone or those alone will be enough. I want to reiterate and remember that if there is that diagnosis, it's medication plus therapy plus support network plus all these practices that we've talked about, right? But with that, you can lead a beautiful life and so rich and full. And so, the diagnosis is not, DNA is not destiny. The diagnosis becomes an opportunity for healing. So don't get like bummed out, if somebody says, oh, I found out I'm bipolar. Good, great. Now you're going to get the right meds, and God willing. And it's a journey. So they're all complementary, right? They're all complementary kinds of approaches. So it's not either or, it's the whole gestalt, but you can do it. Trust yourself, bless yourself, get help, connect to people who love you, and live your best life.
I love it. Well, I love so many things you share, just, disconnecting, that 24, 36 hours. What else? Oh yeah.
I'm going to tell you about the book.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, sorry, this book that I just wrote, it's called BrainStorm: From Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum. It's a memoir, but it's got a lot of stuff we talked about plus more. People say it reads like a novel, finish it in a day. There's also an audiobook. If you go on Amazon, you'll see some really beautiful, compelling reviews. And I encourage you to get the book. If you look up Sara Schley, BrainStorm on Amazon, or you can go to my website, which is Sara Schley, like that spelled, .com. And it's probably in your notes too, right, Matt? So I hope you read the book. I hope you drop me a line on my website. Let me know what you thought about it. Leave a review, that kind of stuff. And appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and thank you for all those wonderful insights. Like I said, just the 24 to 36 hours to yourself, is just simple and practical, and getting yourself into balance, seeking balance. But I think from that balance, we're striving for growth. It's just, right. That's why I had the yin yang symbol. It's like that, there's a push and pull, right? There's an exertion and there's a rest. And so noticing that in yourself. But I just appreciate you and your work, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate you too. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. My
Good
pleasure.
chatting with you.
All right. Thanks, guys, for watching. We'll see you in the next one.